All right, so today we're going deep on Vindolanda.
Vindolanda.
Now, when you hear Roman fort, you might be thinking, okay, what's so exciting about a fort?
Right.
But this one's really something special, and you said it in some excerpts from an academic article all about Vindolanda, and
Yeah.
as we go through this, you'll see it's way more than just a fort.
It's incredible just how this site developed over time. I mean, the layers here are
Literally,
literally,
they
yeah.
built 5 wooden forts before they even got to the stone one.
Before they even thought about stone. Yeah, 5 wooden forts, each one built on top of the last one.
I mean, you'd think they'd have it figured out after the first or second one.
You'd think so, right?
So what does the article say about why they kept rebuilding and rebuilding?
Well, I think it shows how much the Roman army was always changing and adapting.
Hmm?
They had to respond to new threats, new leaders, even just figuring out like what worked in that environment.
It's almost like they were experimenting with fort design.
Yeah, in a way,
And we even see different groups of soldiers cycling through,
cohorts, yeah.
each with their own specialties.
Exactly, each one bringing something different to the table.
And if you look in the article, you'll see that first fort was built around 85 AD by the first cohort of Tungrians.
The Tungrians.
Yeah, and they were from what's now Belgium.
Modern-day Belgium.
And they were a pretty standard infantry unit.
Your classic Roman foot soldier.
Yeah, but then things get interesting because the 9th cohort of Batavians comes in.
The Batavians.
And they build a bigger fort.
Oh, yeah, these guys were something else.
Yeah, these guys were not just your average soldiers.
Not at all. The Batavians were elite cavalry known for their fighting skills, and, well, they were fierce.
Fierce.
Yeah, they were even Emperor Augustus's personal bodyguard.
Whoa.
So it really makes you wonder what was happening on this frontier that they needed to send in the emperor's own cavalry.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Definitely raises some questions.
The article mentions around 100 AD, there's another rebuild under the command of Flavius Cerealis.
Cerealis? Oh, he was a major figure.
Yeah, this guy was a big deal.
Put down rebellions, expanded Roman territory. I mean, his involvement tells us Vindolanda was strategically important.
It was not just some random outpost.
No way.
So you've got the Tungrians, you've got the Batavians, and then after the Batavians, the Tungrians come back.
They come back again.
To build another fort even bigger this time.
It's like a fort building competition.
I know, right?
But then things change big time.
Yeah.
Hadrian's Wall gets built nearby.
Ah.
Suddenly, we're not talking wood anymore, we're talking stone.
Stone.
Yeah. What do you think about that shift?
Well, Hadrian's Wall, that was a whole other level, right?
Huge
It
undertaking.
was about drawing a line in the sand. It was a statement.
Literally a wall.
I mean, a literal wall.
Yeah.
But it was meant to be impressive.
Definitely.
From it, it's about projecting power.
It's not just function anymore, it's a message.
Yeah.
And the soldiers who get to occupy this fancy new stone fort are the second cohort of Nervians.
The Nervians.
Now, you might have heard of the Nervi.
Hmm.
They gave Julius Caesar a very hard time.
Oh, yeah, they did.
During his conquest of Gaul, they were known for being incredibly fierce and brave in battle.
So even with a massive wall,
Even with the wall.
they weren't taking any chances.
Nope. They wanted their toughest troops holding the line.
Which makes you wonder what kind of threats they were facing.
Right.
That even with Hadrian's Wall, they needed the Nervi station there.
Exactly shows you how seriously the Romans took this frontier.
It really does.
But even with their best soldiers and a wall, things weren't always peaceful, were they?
Not even close, because then we get to the rebellion of 208 to 211 AD.
Big trouble.
And things get really shaken up. I mean, to the point that Emperor Septimius Severus has to come over from Rome himself.
Wow, all the way from Rome.
To deal with it.
Yeah.
And you'd think, all right, he's going to come and crush the rebellion.
Right.
Build an even bigger, badder fort.
The ultimate Roman fort.
But that's not what happens.
Not even close.
Instead, he demolishes the existing stone fort.
Demolishes it.
And orders the construction of these unusual round huts.
Round huts.
Yeah, round huts. It's not what you'd expect.
It's a real head-scratcher.
The article suggests these huts might have housed families of local farmers.
Local farmers.
Like, almost like a forced immigration kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory.
What do you think was going on there?
Well, it could be that Severus was trying a different approach.
Mm.
Maybe he realized brute force wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Maybe he thought offering some stability
Mm.
and protection to the local population.
In exchange for loyalty?
Yeah, exactly. And maybe that was a way to achieve some kind of lasting peace.
It definitely challenges the image of the Romans as just being all about military domination.
It suggests a more complex picture
Yeah.
of how they operated on the frontiers.
And that complexity is what makes Vindolanda so interesting.
Absolutely. We're seeing the Roman world in all its messy and fascinating glory.
We really are, and we're just getting started. Let's see what happens after these round huts and what new challenges come up for the people of Vindolanda. Okay, so we've got these round huts, maybe full of families, and, the Romans.
Yeah.
They like their order, their structure, so what happens next?
Well, Severus doesn't completely ditch the fort idea.
Hmm.
He builds a new one right on top of those round huts.
On top?
Yeah, and it's back to that classic rectangular style.
Oh, so a little bit of both?
It's like he's combining the two approaches, military might with a bit of integration.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
The article mentions that this time it's the 4th cohort of Gauls stationed there.
The Gauls.
What do we know about it?
Well, the Gauls were actually a pretty diverse bunch.
Really?
Yeah, they came from all sorts of different tribes in what we now call France.
Okay.
They were known for being strong fighters, of course.
Of course.
But also for being adaptable. They could be fierce warriors, but they also figured out how to live alongside the Ronins, even picked up some of their customs.
That's interesting. So it makes you wonder what these soldiers thought, coming all the way from Gaul to this outpost.
Yeah.
Did they see themselves as conquerors, as peacekeepers? What was going through their minds?
It's a great question, and it reminds us that the Roman army, it wasn't just one big homogeneous blob.
Right?
It was made up of individuals, each with their own story.
Their own experiences again.
Exactly.
And those stories, those experiences weren't just limited to inside the fort walls, were they?
Not a do.
Because Vindolanda had a whole community growing up around it, right?
It did. That's where we get the term vicus.
Vicus.
Yeah, so imagine this bustling civilian settlement right outside the fort. You've got shops, homes, workshops, maybe even a tavern or two.
Nice.
This is where the soldiers' families lived, along with merchants, craftspeople, anyone who wanted to build a life out on this wild frontier.
So it's a whole society, a whole little world springing up around this fort.
Exactly.
And the article even mentions a butchery in the vicus.
A butchery.
Yeah, and it had a pretty advanced drainage system.
They took their hygiene seriously.
It sounds like it.
It's funny, isn't it? We think of the Romans all about grandeur and military power, but then you see these little everyday details.
Yeah.
And it reminds you that they were also worried about things like sanitation and infrastructure.
Practicus stuff.
Exactly, the nitty-gritty of building a functioning community.
It also shows a certain level of Romanization, too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
These locals adopting Roman ways of life, Roman building techniques. I mean, how much of that was voluntary? How much was forced?
That's a question historians are still debating.
Mm.
It was probably a mix of both, to be honest, with different levels of acceptance and pushback from the local population.
Makes sense.
But, all good things must come to an end.
Right.
And Vindolanda is no exception. So what does the article say about the fort's eventual decline?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, this is where things get a little complicated because you often hear this story about the Romans just up and leaving Britain in 410 AD.
Yeah.
But at Vindolanda, the evidence points to a much more gradual process.
Really?
Yeah, possibly even happening over decades.
So no mass exodus, no one just suddenly abandoning the place.
Not necessarily. The article talked about a rebuilding of the fort around 300 AD. But this time, the vicus seems to be abandoned.
Oh, wow.
So maybe things were getting a little too risky and people decided they felt safer inside those fort walls.
Makes sense. It's a changing world.
Yeah, the Roman grip on Britain is loosening, anxiety is rising, and the frontier, well, it's becoming a much more dangerous place to live.
It really highlights how much things had changed.
It does, and as that Roman presence weakens, you have to wonder what happened to the people who had built their lives at Vindolanda.
Yeah, where did they go?
Did they move on? Did they try to hold on to some parts of Roman life, or did they adapt to a new reality?
Yeah, it's like that stability and order the Romans brought is fading.
Right.
And everyone's left to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, it's a real turning point.
But even in decline.
Even in decline.
Vindolanda has something to teach us, right?
Absolutely. It reminds us that empires, no matter how powerful they are, they don't last forever.
Hmm.
But it also shows us how resilient people can be.
Yeah.
How they adapt and change even when faced with uncertainty.
It also shows how much we can learn from these archaeological sites.
Yeah.
They challenge our assumptions and give us a much more nuanced view of the past.
That's the beauty of archaeology, isn't it? It's not just about digging up old objects.
Yeah.
It's about piecing together stories, understanding the lives people lived, and connecting those experiences to our own.
So as Vindolanda goes from this bustling frontier community to a silent ruin, what can we take away from its story? I mean, it's kind of beautiful in a way, this place that saw so much change, so much life, eventually just going back to the earth. And what's left are these pieces, these clues to its past.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how even the biggest structures, the strongest empires, they don't last forever. All that's left are the stories, the little details of everyday life that get preserved in the stones and the artifacts.
And it's crazy to think about all that work, that went into building those forts, one after another. All the people living in the vicus, the Romans, interacting with the locals. I mean, it's all gone. But in a way, it's still here.
Yeah, it's like a time capsule. It's not just a ruin, it's a window into that world.
We get to see the Roman Empire not as just a name in a history book, but as a real, living, breathing society.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder what those last days were like as the Romans were losing their grip on Britain.
I know.
Did people try to hang on to the old ways? Was there sadness, or was there like a sense of relief, maybe even opportunity?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but my guess is it was a mix of all those things.
Yeah.
For some people, the end of Roman rule might have felt like a chance to start fresh, to go back to their own traditions.
Right.
But for others, it probably felt scary and uncertain.
And that's what makes history so fascinating, right? It's not just about dates and battles. It's about people and how they deal with change.
Absolutely. And Vindolanda gives us such a unique perspective on that. It's not just the big story of the Roman Empire. It's about the lives of everyday people, the soldiers, the merchants, the families. And it makes that past feel real in a way that a lot of other sites don't.
So as we finish up this deep dive into Vindolanda, what's the one thing you really want our listener to take away from all this?
I hope it's that history isn't just something we read about in books. It's an ongoing process. It's a conversation between the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
And places like Vindolanda, they give us a chance to be a part of that conversation.
You really connect with the past.
Exactly.
And maybe realize that the past isn't really gone. It's all around us, just waiting to be rediscovered.
So the next time you're out exploring, keep your eyes open. You never know what you might find.
Thanks for going on this deep dive with us. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging for those hidden pieces of the past.
All right, so today we are diving into Roman Britain, specifically Vindolanda, a fort along Hadrian's Wall.
Okay.
And, I think most people know about the wall itself, but what's so incredible about Vindolanda is that it's less about these, grand structures.
Yeah.
And it's more about the stuff that was left behind, the everyday things that tell us about how people lived there.
Right.
Almost 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And we have got some amazing research to help us dig into these discoveries. And get this. Because of the unique oxygen-free soil conditions,
Oh, wow.
even things like wood and leather are incredibly well preserved.
Really?
Yeah, it's like somebody just hit the pause button on Roman life.
Wow.
We're talking boxing gloves, letters written in ink, even a wooden toilet seat.
That's incredible.
I know. It's amazing the things that they're finding.
Yeah. And what makes Vindolanda so valuable, I think, is its location.
Okay.
This wasn't Rome's bustling center. It was the edge of the empire, the frontier.
Right.
Yet the artifacts tell us it wasn't just this harsh military outpost.
Okay.
There were families, businesses, even signs of leisure and recreation. It really challenges the image that we might have of just a bleak and isolated existence.
Okay, that definitely hooks me in.
Yeah.
But before we get to all of these amazing everyday objects, I've got to ask about the people behind the dig itself.
Sure.
The sources mention this Burley family. They've been excavating Vindolanda for generations, right?
Yeah, it's remarkable, really. Eric Burley started back in the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
And his sons and then his grandson carried on the work.
That's amazing.
That kind of continuous research is almost unheard of in archaeology.
Yeah, I bet.
It means they could track changes over time in incredible detail.
Right.
How the military tactics evolved, how the community itself changed over centuries.
So it's not just snapshots. It's like watching a whole movie of Vindolanda's history unfolding.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And speaking of unfolding history, we have to talk about those ink tablets.
Yes.
They are famous for a reason.
Yeah.
Perfectly preserved, and they weren't just for elite record keeping.
Okay.
We have soldiers writing letters home, invitations to parties, even a note about someone sending snacks to their loved ones stationed at the fort.
Oh, that's great.
It's incredible.
Wait, snacks. That's hilarious. It's such a human touch,
Yeah.
It makes them relatable even across all this time.
Absolutely. And it also shatters this assumption that literacy was rare back then. We see it across social classes, this vibrant culture of communication, even in this remote location.
That's so interesting. It's making me rethink what it even meant to be on the edge of an empire.
Yeah.
Clearly, it wasn't cut off from the rest of Roman life.
Right.
All right, you have to tell me more about these boxing gloves.
Okay.
When I saw that in the research, my jaw dropped.
Yeah.
They're described as surprisingly similar to modern ones.
It's true. They're constructed from a single piece of leather, shaped into a pouch and padded, likely with wool or horsehair.
Interesting.
What's interesting is that experts believe they were for sport or training, not gladiatorial combat.
So not like this brutal violence,
Right.
but maybe more like soldiers just blowing off steam.
Yeah.
Their own version of a pickup game.
Yeah, that's a likely scenario, and there are still some mysteries.
Oh.
They're not a matching pair.
Okay.
And they date back to around 120 A.D.
Hmm.
That's early in Vindolanda's history, suggesting this kind of leisure activity was there from the start.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he's got a community that's literate, likes snacks, and enjoys a good boxing match.
Yeah.
What else have they unearthed that reveals these surprisingly ordinary aspects of life at Vindolanda?
Well, there's one find that's both mundane and surprisingly insightful.
Okay.
A wooden toilet seat.
A wooden toilet seat.
It's a simple object,
Yeah.
but it says a lot about the effort Romans put into even, like, basic comforts,
Right.
even on the frontier.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in this grand narrative of empires, but
Yeah.
it's these little details that really ground us. It reminds us that they were just people
Yeah.
dealing with the same bodily functions.
Exactly, and sometimes those mundane details
Yeah.
can lead to much bigger questions.
All right.
Like the discovery of a child's remains in a
Huh.
barrack room.
A child's remains.
It's believed to be female,
Wow.
possibly with bound arms.
Really?
The researchers are still piecing together the story there.
Wow, that's both fascinating and kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the circumstances of the family.
Yeah.
It definitely complicates the picture of life at the fort.
It does. It reminds us that Vindolanda, like any community, had its share of tragedy and hardship.
Right.
The discovery also highlights how archaeology can give a voice to those often overlooked in history.
Hmm.
Women, children,
Yeah.
those whose lives weren't recorded in official documents.
Speaking of giving a voice, the sources mention a personalized fibula.
Right.
That's a kind of Roman brooch, right?
Yes.
With the name Quintus Salonius punched into it.
Yeah, it's such a small object, but so powerful. It belonged to a real person,
Right.
someone who lived and walked these grounds.
Wow.
It makes you want to reach back through time and learn about this person,
Yeah.
what their life was like.
I totally get that. It's like holding this tangible link to the past.
Right.
It's interesting. We've talked about the letters, these personal belongings.
Yeah.
It seems that Vindolanda had a strong sense of individual identity.
Yeah.
Even though it was this military outpost.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it's something that sets Vindolanda apart from other Roman forts.
Mm.
There's this interplay between the collective,
Right.
the military structure, the shared living space,
Yeah.
and then these individual lives being lived out within it.
So even with all the discipline and the order,
Yeah,
there was still room for self-expression.
definitely.
And maybe a bit of healthy competition. The research mentioned an ox cranium used for target practice.
Right.
That wasn't just about honing military skills, though, was it?
Definitely not.
No.
It speaks to the importance of leisure and recreation in Roman society.
Right.
We know that they were avid fans of sports and games,
Yeah.
and target practice would have been both useful and entertaining.
It makes sense. And I read that they've used 3D imaging to analyze the skull.
Right.
That's pretty high tech for studying something so ancient.
It is, and it's a great example of how technology is transforming archaeology.
Right.
We can now extract incredibly detailed information from artifacts,
Oh, wow.
creating a much richer understanding of how they were used
Okay.
and what they meant to the people who owned them.
Okay, so we've covered daily life, these personal stories, even target practice.
Yeah.
What about the spiritual side of things? Okay, did they find any evidence of religious practices at Vindolanda?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the expected Roman gods.
Hmm.
Remember, this was a period of transition
Okay.
with Christianity gaining influence.
Right.
One particularly fascinating find
Okay.
is a carved sandstone artifact. It could be Mars, the god of war,
Okay.
but some believe it depicts Mercury, the messenger god.
Interesting. Almost like those two sides of Vindolanda itself.
Right.
The military and then the more social and communicative aspects we've been talking about.
Exactly.
What about the evidence for Christianity, though?
Well, there's one object that really bridges those two worlds.
Okay.
A 5th century chalice,
A chalice.
incredibly ornate.
Wow.
It's decorated with both Roman and Christian imagery.
Hold on. A chalice that's both Roman and Christian?
Yeah.
That sounds like a whole story in itself.
It is.
What kind of imagery are we talking about?
We're talking crosses, angels, a priestly figure,
Okay.
alongside ships, a whale, and fish. Those have Roman connections too,
Oh, okay.
but also early Christian symbolism.
Wow, that's interesting.
Plus, there are inscriptions in Latin, Greek,
Ugh.
and possibly even Ogham.
Oh, wow.
an early Celtic script.
Wow, it's like they crammed every symbol they could onto this chalice.
Yeah, it is quite a find.
What do researchers make of that? Was it like a sign of religion intolerance?
Hmm.
Or maybe some kind of blending of beliefs?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It speaks to this complex religious landscape of the late Roman period.
Right.
It's tempting to see it as this harmonious blend.
Yeah.
But there was likely tension and conflict, too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This chalice, it's like a physical embodiment of that cultural and spiritual shift taking place.
You know, we've talked about Vindolanda revealing this ordinary side of Roman life.
Yeah,
But this chalice is anything but ordinary.
right.
It's a reminder that these people were grappling with big questions, trying to make sense of their world, just like we do today.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the power of objects to transcend time
Yeah,
and connect us to those who came before.
it does.
Just imagine, this chalice was held by someone nearly 1,600 years ago.
Wow.
They had hopes, fears, beliefs,
Right.
and this object was part of their world.
It gives me chills, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone from toilet seats to inscribed brooches to this incredibly symbolic chalice.
Yeah.
Vindolanda is clearly more than just a fort. It's
Yeah.
like a microcosm of Roman society and all its complexity.
It really is. And what's so exciting is that we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Every excavation season brings new discoveries, adding pieces to the puzzle
That's so cool.
and challenging our understanding of the past.
Right.
It's like a never-ending story, and we get to be a part of it.
I love that. A never-ending story.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what future excavations might reveal.
Right.
What else is out there just waiting to be discovered
Yeah,
and add to this rich tapestry of Vindolanda.
absolutely.
Yeah, it is amazing to think about all those stories still hidden beneath the ground, just waiting to be unearthed.
Right.